A lonely widower, with no hope left in his heart, is stopped at a fence by a little girl in ragged clothes, asking him, "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" The first time Samuel Wyatt heard her voice, it wasn't much, louder than the wind blowing through the pine trees. He'd just hitched his mule outside the general store, a sack of flour under one arm, and a worn list of meaningless chores tucked into his pocket. Another day of surviving. Eating just enough to stay alive. Sleeping just long enough not to feel the ache in his chest anymore. It had been 3 years since Evelyn passed. 3 quiet, crawling, colourless years. He was turning back toward his wagon when the voice caught him. "Sir?" It was small, cautious. He looked around, hand still on the wagon's side. "Sir, down here." And that's when he saw her. A little girl standing on the other side of the white picket fence outside. Miss Adeline's orphan house. The paint on the fence was peeling, the grass patchy behind her boots. She was no older than 7, maybe 8. Too skinny. Dress frayed around the sleeves. Freckles dotted her nose like she'd spent a summer watching clouds with no one to share her dreams with. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Brown and heavy, with something far too old for her age. They looked like Evelyn's eyes the night she told him she was dying. He cleared his throat. "You talking to me?" She nodded, fingers tightening around the slat of the fence like she wasn't supposed to be there. He shifted. "Well, what do you need?" Her lips quivered. Not with fear, with hope. And that was worse somehow, because Sam didn't have any left to give. "Could you—" She hesitated. "Could you pretend to be my daddy? Just for one day?" The sack of flour nearly slipped from his grip. He stared at her, mouth dry. "What?" Her little hands clenched the fence tighter. "I just need one day, so I don't get sent away." Behind her, the orphanage door opened slightly. A woman's voice called from within, stern, tired, distracted. The girl glanced over her shoulder quickly, then back at him with panic. "Please, sir? Just pretend. I won't bother you again." The door creaked. She looked ready to bolt. Sam didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the way her fingers trembled. Or maybe it was because she said, "Daddy," with such soft, broken desperation. But he nodded. "All right," he said before he knew he was saying it. "I'll be your daddy." Just then, the woman at the door stepped out, arms crossed, wearing a sour frown and a wool shawl that didn't quite hide her rigid posture. "Margaret Ann, how many times have I told you not to wander off?" The little girl's name was Margaret. Sam stepped forward before the woman could say another word. "It's all right, Ma'am," he said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "I came to see her. Thought it was high time I did." The matron blinked. "And you are—" He stepped through the gate. Samuel Wyatt, her father. Margaret froze. The matron squinted at him, unconvinced. She never said her father was coming. She's been here near on 6 months. Sam placed a hand gently on the girl's head. "I've been searching for her all that time. Word travels slow. Papers were filed up in Bozeman. It was a gamble, but his voice had that low timbre of grief, too tired to lie well, which made it more believable." The matron's mouth puckered. "Well, we'll need proper signatures, of course. Verification." "Of course," he said. Margaret reached for his hand without looking up. Sam let her hold it. The matron glanced at them both. "Well, don't just stand there. You'll have to come inside and speak with the records clerk." Sam nodded. "Lead the way." Margaret looked up at him like he'd just plucked her off the edge of a cliff. Inside the orphanage, the air smelled of boiled potatoes and bleach. Children watched them from the hallway, some with envy, some with numbness. The walls were grey, the light dim. Sam's boots echoed on the wooden floor as they walked, his hand still in Margaret's. She didn't say a word until they were alone, in a corner office, and the clerk stepped away to gather some forms. Then she whispered, "Thank you." He crouched to her level. "You shouldn't lie to people," he said softly. Her face fell. She started, blinking fast. They were gonna send me away. Some man came looking. He had a wagon with cages. Said he was taken, the ones no one claimed. Sam's stomach turned. Cages? She nodded. He said I was too little to be useful, that I'd be the first one to go. Sam didn't know what to say. There was a fire rising in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The clerk came back, and the next few minutes blurred into forged signatures and quiet approvals. Margaret never let go of his hand. When they walked out, she asked, "So, do you live far?" Sam glanced down. "About an hour outside town, up the mountain trail. You ever been around trees?" She smiled for the first time. "Only in pictures." He lifted her into the wagon gently. She settled like she'd never had a blanket of her own before. As he guided the mule down the trail and the orphanage disappeared behind them, he asked, "What made you pick me?" She hugged her knees. "You looked like you knew how it felt, to not have anyone." Sam didn't speak. He couldn't. That night, he made her stew with carrots and potatoes. She sat at the table swinging her legs, humming softly. He couldn't remember the last time the cabin had sound in it. He found a spare shirt of Evelyn's and rolled the sleeves for her. Margaret curled up by the fire with it tucked around her shoulders. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "You don't have to keep pretending. Tomorrow, I'll say I got mixed up. They won't blame you." Sam stared into the flames. "No," he said, his voice rough. "We'll keep pretending, a little longer." He stood to stoke the fire, but paused at the door, because out in the woods, far enough to be missed but close enough to be heard, was the sound of wagon wheels and a voice calling softly in the dark. "Little girl, where are you?" The voice carried faint through the trees, like a wolf circling the edge of a clearing. The fire popped in the hearth behind Samuel, but he didn't turn. He stood in the doorway, fingers brushing the edge of the frame, jaw clenched tight as the wheels rolled and creaked somewhere beyond the hill. "Little girl, where are you?" It was the same voice Margaret had warned him about. He closed the door carefully, locking the top and bottom bolts. The cabin wasn't much, just a single main room with a lean-to kitchen and a loft upstairs. But it was all he had, and now it had a heartbeat again. He turned to check on Margaret. She was fast asleep, curled into the crook of the patched sofa, Evelyn's old shawl tucked around her shoulders. Her fingers were still balled into little fists, as though she were ready to be snatched at any moment. Sam stared at her for a long while. This wasn't a game anymore. She had chosen him to pretend. But he was the one who'd said yes. The weight of that was settling deeper than he expected. It wasn't a favor to a frightened child anymore. It was a promise, whether he wanted it or not. He moved quietly to the back room, took down his rifle from the hooks, and checked the rounds. He'd barely touched it since Evelyn passed, but his hands remembered the motions. He stood at the window, peering out toward the dark woods. Whoever that man was, he wasn't someone passing by. He was looking, but he wouldn't find her here. Sam didn't sleep that night. By morning, Margaret was up before the rooster crowed, standing on the porch in her bare feet, staring at the sunrise like she couldn't believe it was real. She turned when she heard him. "Is this really your house?" she asked. He nodded, rubbing the sleep from his face. She smiled. "I never thought a house could smell like coffee and sawdust at the same time." He chuckled. "Well, when you don't clean the counters after cutting firewood, that's what you get." He handed her a tin cup with warm milk and honey, and she sipped it like it was liquid gold. "Do I have to go back?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Sam paused. "Not today." She looked down. "They always say that." He crouched next to her. "Margaret," he said gently, "I didn't bring you out here just for one day. If you want to stay, I'll make it work." She turned her head slowly. "Even if I'm not really yours?" He swallowed hard. "Maybe. I need someone too." She blinked fast. "Can I call you Papa?" The word hit him like a landslide. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said. You can. She didn't run into his arms or cry like the girls in storybooks. She just leaned her small body against his side and stayed there, silent and warm, like a part of him had been found again, but it didn't last. By midday, Sam had taken her into town with him to the post office, hoping to ask the clerk for information on a certain man with a wagon and a taste for caged children. Margaret kept her eyes down, but he held her hand tight. As they crossed the main road, a voice called out from behind, "Well, I'll be. Is that you, Sam Wyatt?" He turned to see a familiar figure hobbling toward him. A squat man with a crooked leg and even crookeder sense of manners. Reverend Clay Gibbons. Sam's stomach twisted. "Morning, Clay." The Reverend's eyes bounced between him and Margaret. "I heard you'd gone silent after Evelyn passed. Thought you left the land to rot." His grin faded slightly. "Didn't know you'd taken up parenting again." Sam stepped half in front of Margaret. "This is Margaret. She's my daughter." Reverend Clay's brow arched like a crow, taking flight. "Didn't know she existed." She didn't, until recently. Margaret looked up at Sam with awe in her eyes. He hadn't just protected her, he'd claimed her. Out loud, in front of someone from town. The Reverend gave a little huff. "Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways, don't he?" Sam didn't answer. He just tipped his hat and led Margaret toward the shop front. But Clay Gibbons wasn't done. "Just watch your back, Sam," he said in a low voice. "Ain't every man likes to see a new father pop up out of nowhere, especially when there's rumors floating." Sam froze. "What rumors?" Clay narrowed his eyes. "That a child was taken from the orphanage under false claims, that a man signed papers he had no right to sign." Sam stepped closer, voice low and sharp. "You be careful what you say next, Reverend." Clay blinked, startled by the fire in Sam's eyes. "I ain't accusing you of nothing," he muttered, stepping back. "Just saying, there's talk. Someone's looking for her." With that, he limped away, cane tapping like a ticking clock. Margaret clung to Sam's coat. "Am I gonna be taken?" "No one's taking you," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." When they got back to the wagon, Sam spotted a note nailed to the side. The handwriting was harsh, the paper thick with dirt. "You can't keep what don't belong to you. I'll be back by sundown." J.W. Sam's hands trembled. Margaret saw the fear and mistook it for regret. "I shouldn't have asked you to pretend," she whispered. "It's my fault." He dropped to one knee. No, don't you ever say that. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. You gave me a reason." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "Are we gonna run?" Sam looked toward the tree line, the mountains, the trail that stretched behind them like an open wound. "No," he said finally. "We're gonna stand." They returned to the cabin and fortified the doors. Sam set trip lines, dug shallow pits, around the back edge of the garden, and even fetched an old bear trap from the shed. Margaret followed him, doing as he asked, asking no questions. She was brave, braver than she should have needed to be. Night came fast. They ate stew in silence. Sam kept the rifle on the table. Then, just after the moon rose, they heard it. Wheels. Again. Closer this time. Margaret's hand gripped his. He moved her behind the curtain. The wagon came into view, pulled by a thick-chested black mare. The man driving it wore a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low. His face was pocked, mouth twisted into something between a grin and a sneer. His eyes gleamed when they caught sight of Sam. "You Samuel Wyatt," he called. Sam stood in the doorway, rifle slung casually at his side. "Depends who's asking." The man clicked his tongue. "Name's Josiah Whitlock. I collect runaways." "She ain't run nowhere. She's property of Adeline's orphan house. Got papers." Sam took a slow breath. "You mean you buy children from the place? Use, then discard the ones who can't work. That it?" Josiah's grin didn't falter. "What I do with my property ain't your concern. She ain't your property. She ain't yours neither. Sam cocked the rifle. She is now. Josiah's hand hovered over his hip where a pistol rested. Careful, old man. I don't miss. Sam didn't flinch. You won't get the chance. Silence. Then Josiah spat into the dirt. You just made this hard for yourself. He snapped the reins. The wagon didn't lurch forward. It turned, but Josiah wasn't gone. Not really. Sam could feel it in his bones. Papa, Margaret whispered from the doorway behind him. Will he come back? Sam looked into the night. Yes, and next time, he won't ask nicely. He didn't sleep that night again, but he sat by the fire with Margaret leaning against his side, and he told her about Evelyn, about love, about the ache of losing it, and she told him about the girls who got taken in the night, the ones who didn't come back. She'd been next until she saw him. You were the first man who didn't look away when I spoke, she said. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. We'll get through this, he promised. Together. But even as he said it, he knew tomorrow would be a war. Because Josiah wasn't going to walk away empty-handed, and Samuel Wyatt, once a hollow man, had something to fight for again. The morning came slow and grey. The light filtering through the shutters was pale, almost sickly, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Sam hadn't slept. Neither had Margaret, though she'd pretended, curled up under Evelyn's quilt on the old couch. He'd heard her breathing change every time the wind howled or the floor creaked. The poor girl hadn't truly known peace in years, and now that she'd tasted a drop of it, the fear of losing it weighed on her more than anything. Sam stood by the stove, boiling water for coffee that neither of them would finish. His hands trembled faintly, not from fear, but from something deeper, a need he hadn't acknowledged in a long time, the need to protect, not just out of duty, but out of love. Because somehow, over the course of a single day, Margaret had gone from a stranger to a part of his soul, a little girl with big eyes and a voice like a broken whisper, who had asked him to be her father for just one day, and now he'd kill to make it forever. She padded into the kitchen, her bare feet barely making a sound against the floorboards. He turned and offered a weak smile. You hungry? She shook her head. Not really. My stomach feels like it's full of bees. He nodded. That's how I feel too. There was a long silence. Then, do you think he'll come today? Yes, Sam said, honest and steady. He'll come, but we'll be ready. Margaret looked up at him, not with fear, but with something harder, something that didn't belong in a child's eyes. I won't let him take me, she said. Sam's throat tightened. You won't have to. He'd made up his mind during the long night. There was no going to the sheriff. Josiah Whitlock had friends in the dark corners of town, and men like him didn't leave paper trails. If he brought the girl to the authorities, they'd likely return her to the same corrupt system that had put her in chains to begin with. No, this fight was his. They spent the morning preparing, not for flight, but for siege. Sam reinforced the front door with the thick barn beam, dragging it across the entry like a barricade. He stacked logs beneath the windows, nailed shut the cellar, and tied bells to tripwires that crisscrossed the trees leading up from the south trail. Margaret helped, quietly, determined. She handed him nails. She held the hammer when his grip faltered. She moved like a child used to being useful, used to being overlooked. But now, Sam looked at her with a new kind of admiration. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting too. By noon, they rested on the porch. A light drizzle fell from the overcast sky, whispering across the pine needles. The silence between them was peaceful now. Not heavy, but calm, like the eye of a storm. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Course. Did you and Evelyn ever have children? He hesitated. No. Why not? He looked out at the woods. God didn't give us that blessing. We tried. For years. But it never happened. Is that why you stopped smiling? She asked. Sam turned to her, surprised. Margaret continued, eyes down. You smiled at me yesterday. A real one. I could tell it had been a while. He swallowed, hard. Yeah, it had. She reached out and placed her hand on top of his. I'm glad you found me, she said, even if it's just pretend. He shook his head. It's not pretend anymore, Margaret. He meant it. Every word. The hours passed. A hawk circled overhead. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the trees, a crow cawed once, sharp and jarring. Then came the sound they'd been waiting for. Wheels again. Only this time, there was more than one set. Sam stood slowly. Margaret tensed. He handed her a pouch. Go to the back room. Take this with you. She nodded and slipped away silently. Sam stepped down from the porch and walked toward the edge of the clearing, where the trail opened into view. The first wagon emerged like a shadow through the trees, followed by a second. Josiah Whitlock rode the lead wagon, reins in one hand, pistol in the other. Behind him sat two other men, rough-looking types with hard eyes and mean jaws. Hired help. They stopped just outside the tripwires. Josiah stood. Well, look at that. One little girl and suddenly you're a hero. Sam didn't answer. Josiah stepped off the wagon, boots crunching against the damp ground. Let's not make this ugly, he said, spreading his arms. You give her back. I give you a coin purse and a kind word. Otherwise, what? Sam cut in. Josiah's grin twisted. Otherwise, we come in and take what's ours. She ain't yours. She is by law, signed and stamped. Sam narrowed his eyes. I don't give a fig about your papers. She's mine now. Josiah whistled low. You really think you can win a fight against the three of us? I don't plan to lose. At that moment, one of the hired men stepped forward, just enough to catch a tripwire. The bell sang out, shrill and loud. The ground beneath him gave way with a snap, and the man dropped into the shallow pit Sam had dug that morning. He cried out as his leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. Josiah's head whipped. Around, Sam raised the rifle and fired once into the air. Next one ain't a warning. Josiah backed up a step, but his grin never left. You really want to go to war for some broken orphan? Sam didn't hesitate. I'd burn this forest down before I let you touch her. Silence stretched between them. Then Josiah turned. We'll be back, with more men. You bring 'em, Sam said. But bring coffins too. Josiah spat and climbed back into the wagon. The wheels creaked as they turned around. The hired man limped, dragging his bad leg behind him, eyes full of hate. They vanished into the woods once more. But Sam knew this wasn't the end. Margaret came out when it was safe, her eyes wide. They'll come back, won't they? He nodded. Yes, with more firepower, maybe even lawmen. She didn't cry. Instead, she said, I don't want to run. You won't have to, Sam promised again. But we'll need help. He didn't know who to trust, but he had one idea. That night, he and Margaret rode into town under the cover of darkness, cloaked and quiet. They avoided the main road, circling the long way around until they reached the church on the east hill. The building stood tall and quiet in the moonlight, its windows glowing faintly. Reverend Clay Gibbons lived out back. Sam knocked 3 times. The Reverend opened the door, eyes narrowing when he saw them. Come to confess your sins, he asked. I came to cash in a favor. Clay tilted his head. What favor? You owe me for what happened with your boy, 5 winters back. The Reverend stiffened. That's old business. It ain't, Sam growled. You know Josiah Whitlock. You know what he's done. And if he brings more men, I'll need hands. I'll need witnesses. Clay looked at Margaret, then back at Sam. You want me to take sides? I want you to do what's right. The Reverend sighed. I'll think on it. Sam nodded. Don't think too long. They left before dawn. When they returned to the cabin, they found something waiting for them on the porch, a doll, old, dirty, Missing one eye, Margaret froze. I know that doll. Sam stared at it, rage building. Josiah had been here, watching, leaving messages. This was no longer about reclaiming a girl. It was about breaking Sam and Margaret. But neither of them would bend. As the sun rose behind them, Sam gathered tools and lumber. He had work to do, because this wasn't just a home anymore. It was a fortress, and family, no matter how new, was worth fighting for. Sam didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, his rifle resting across his lap, every muscle in, his body taut and wired, waiting for the wrong sound. The doll on the porch hadn't moved, but he kept it in sight, a grotesque symbol of Josiah's message. It wasn't just a threat. It was proof that they were being watched, that Josiah had come right to the edge of the only place that felt safe for Margaret and walked away smiling. Sam had seen that kind of evil before. It didn't bark. It whispered. By sunrise, Margaret was already stirring, sitting upright in the corner with her knees pulled to her chest. The girl didn't ask for breakfast. She didn't say good morning. Instead, she asked, "How long until he comes again?" "Not long." Sam stood and stretched his stiff back. "But we'll be ready." He opened the door and walked out onto the porch, retrieving the doll like it was a bomb that might go off in his hands. He studied the stitching, the way one button eye hung by a thread. It was an old handmade thing, one that had likely been passed between frightened little girls. A doll that should have brought comfort, now twisted into a threat. He tossed it into the stove. Margaret didn't flinch as the flames swallowed it. That morning, Sam didn't go to the mill. He didn't go to town. He didn't chop wood or fix the fence or mend tools. Instead, he built barricades. He turned his home into a stronghold, hammering boards across the lower windows and digging a second trench beneath the far window. The cabin itself wasn't made for war, but Sam was. In the war, he'd seen what it took to defend something. The difference now was, this time, he had something to lose. He wasn't alone, either. By mid-morning, a wagon rolled up the long trail, driven by none other than Reverend Clay Gibbons. His hat was low, his coat worn, but his face was sober. "I thought about what you said," the Reverend told him. "You were right. I do owe you." Clay stepped off the wagon and reached behind the seat, pulling out a long crate. Inside was a hunting rifle, 2 revolvers, and a pouch of cartridges. "I won't shoot anyone," he said, "but I'll stand watch. I'll write the statements. If Josiah brings lawmen, I'll be there to speak." Sam took the rifle and nodded once. "That's all I ask." But it wasn't all Clay brought. From the back of the wagon climbed another man, a young one, barely more than a boy, with curly hair and wide shoulders. "James Gibbons," Clay said. "My nephew. He fought off 2 men who tried to take his sister in Kansas. He can hold a gun. He can help." James nodded silently, lifting his own rifle and holding it like he knew how to use it. Margaret came out onto the porch just as the second wagon appeared down the trail. Sam stiffened, but this time it wasn't Josiah. It was someone else. "Tommy Marks," Sam muttered. "Well, I'll be." Tommy was a former deputy, pushed out years ago after refusing a bribe from Josiah Whitlock himself. Now, he ran a horse ranch on the edge of town. His appearance wasn't flashy, but when he stepped down from his wagon, Sam knew this was a man ready for war. "You always said you'd call me if you ever needed a hand," Tommy said. "Well, here I am." He gestured to the wagon bed, revealing 2 more men, quiet, serious types, who gave nods and not much else. "You paying us?" one asked. "No," Sam said. "Didn't think so," the man replied, and got to work digging out around the cabin. Margaret watched them all with wide eyes, unsure what to make of the sudden army that had gathered for her. But Sam saw what it did to her shoulders. They squared for the first time. She stood taller, as if, for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. All afternoon they worked. They turned the cabin into something more than a home. Reinforced walls, extra timber for cover, traps along the trail, tripwire connected to bells and cans. James even rigged a system that would swing the barn doors open as a distraction if needed. As dusk neared, the group sat around the stove eating beans and dry bread, sharing silent looks that didn't need words. Margaret whispered something then, barely audible. Sam leaned closer. "What was that?" I said. "I've never had anyone come for me before, not even once." She looked at him, then at the others. "Why now?" Sam didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he said, "Because you matter." 3 simple words, but they struck something deep inside her. She looked away quickly, blinking fast, as if tears embarrassed her. But she didn't run. She didn't hide. She just let herself feel it. That night, Sam tucked her in and sat by the fire, his rifle in hand. The storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones, and he'd burn the whole mountain down before he let Josiah take her. The storm broke just after midnight. It wasn't rain or thunder. It was the snapping of branches. Sam was on his feet before the others had even stirred. He moved to the front window, crouching low. Outside, moonlight spilled over the clearing in pale light. Movement, figures creeping through the trees. He whispered, "They're here." Tommy Marks rolled out of his cot, gun drawn. James Gibbons nodded and moved toward the side window. Clay pulled on his coat and said a quiet prayer, more out of reflex than fear. Sam turned to Margaret. "Stay in the back room. Don't open that door for anyone unless it's me. You understand?" She nodded hard, eyes huge, but not tearful. She was braver than most men Sam had known. Then came the voice, outside, loud, sharp. "Samuel Carter, you've got one chance to turn that girl over. Josiah." Sam stepped out onto the porch. "I told you already," he said, loud and even. "She's not yours." 3 more men emerged from the woods behind Josiah. One had a torch. One had a shotgun. "You've made this real complicated," Josiah said. "You think these fellas here are gonna save you? Law's still on my side." Sam raised the rifle slightly. "Law don't matter when it protects monsters," Josiah sneered. "Fine, let's do it your way." The torch came flying first, over the clearing, arcing through the night sky. It landed in a haystack beside the barn. Flames erupted. Margaret screamed inside the cabin. But Sam didn't move. Not yet. The hired men surged forward, but they didn't get far. James fired first, hitting one in the leg. Tommy got the second. Clay didn't fire, but he shouted scripture as loud as thunder, and somehow it felt just as powerful. One man broke through the barricade on the side and burst through the back window, only to be met by Margaret. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the pouch Sam had given her. She flung the contents, ashes from the stove, straight into the man's eyes. He howled, stumbling back into the glass shards and tripping over the wash basin. Sam reached him seconds later and knocked him cold with the butt of his rifle. Fire crackled louder now. The barn was going up fast. Sam turned to Josiah. The man hadn't moved. He just stood there smiling. "You can't win this," he said. "Even if you kill me, someone will come. Someone always does." Sam walked toward him, rifle lowered but eyes locked. "I don't care about winning. I care about her." Josiah laughed. "You think she's some kind of daughter to you? You're a broken old man." Sam's voice dropped. "Maybe, but I'd rather be broken with her than whole without her." Then, unexpectedly, Josiah moved fast, drawing a blade from under his coat, but Sam was faster. The rifle cracked once. Josiah fell. The clearing went quiet. The fire still burned behind them, but the enemy was gone. Sam stood there, breathing hard, watching the man who had caused so much pain take his final breath. Clay walked up behind him. "It's over," he said quietly. Sam shook his head. "Not yet." He turned to the cabin. Inside, Margaret waited, her face pale but proud. He knelt beside her. "You were brave. So were you." "Do you still want me to pretend?" She looked at him. "No," she whispered. Not anymore. Sam pulled her into a hug. Tight, fierce, real. And for the first time in what felt like years, he cried. Not out of sorrow, but out of hope, because something inside him had come back to life, and he wasn't letting it go. The morning after the fire, silence stretched across the homestead. Smoke still curled upward from the scorched remains of the barn. The air smelled like ash, but it also smelled like freedom, hard-won, scarred, and fragile. For the first time since Margaret had whispered those desperate words through the fence, there were no footsteps chasing her, no shadows lurking behind trees, no more Josiah. But the end of one nightmare didn't mean peace came easy. Sam stood alone in the field, boots sunk into blackened earth, staring at the ruins of the barn. That barn had housed everything he'd tried to keep locked away: tools, hay, storage. But it also had been the first place Margaret had dared to giggle. He remembered the sound echoing off the rafters as she'd chased a stray chicken, laughing at how it outran her. Gone now, but not everything was lost. Behind him, the cabin stood strong, reinforced, protected, but more importantly, it was full of life, real life. Inside, Margaret slept curled in the armchair, wrapped in a quilt that smelled like cedar and hope. Clay Gibbons had returned to town with his nephew to speak to the sheriff, pledging on his collar that Josiah's men had attacked first. Tommy and the others had offered to stay, but Sam had thanked them quietly and sent them home. He needed time with her now, just the two of them. When Margaret stirred awake, she found Sam kneeling beside her, holding out a wooden bowl of warm porridge. "It's got honey in it," he said with a small smile. "From the neighbor's hive. Thought you deserved something sweet after all that." She looked at him carefully, like she didn't trust the quiet yet. "Is he really gone?" "He is. And they won't come back." "I made sure they won't," Sam answered softly. "And if anyone else does, they'll have to come through me." She looked down at the porridge, then back at him. "Why?" "Because you're mine now." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She set the bowl aside and leaned forward, curling her arms around his waist and pressing her cheek to his chest. For minutes, neither said a word. Then she whispered, "Can I still call you Daddy, even if we don't have to pretend anymore?" Sam's throat tightened. He gently touched the back of her head. "You can call me that for the rest of your life." The days that followed were quiet, but not easy. The sheriff, a man named Walter Quaid, paid a visit to the homestead 2 days after Josiah's death. He came not to arrest Sam, but to speak. "I was never fond of Josiah," Quaid admitted, tipping his hat in the shadow of the porch. "But he had half the town under his thumb. Folks are afraid to speak up." Sam didn't flinch. "Are you?" "No, but I got a badge to think about. So do me a favor. Stay put a while. Don't go parading through town saying he got what he deserved." Sam nodded. "I'll keep to myself." Walter hesitated. "The girl, Margaret, I read some reports, said she wasn't his blood." "She was his property," Sam growled. "And I ain't letting her go back into a system that would have handed her back to him." "I'm not asking you to," Walter replied. "I just needed to hear it from you. I'll file her as a ward under your protection. Keep her off the books, so to speak. You treat her like your daughter. I won't argue." Sam watched him leave, then returned to the porch where Margaret was playing with a stack of small stones. She'd made a game of stacking them without letting them fall. "Did he say I have to go?" she asked, not looking up. "No," he said. "You're mine." She smiled softly and added another stone. As spring pressed forward, things began to change. Margaret's steps grew lighter. Her hair, once matted and tangled, now shone in the morning sun thanks to the lavender soap Sam had traded for in town. She began to talk more, to ask questions, and to hum while helping with chores. She took to brushing the horses and cleaning the tack like it was second nature. One morning, Sam found her in the field, drawing a lopsided heart in the dirt with a stick. Inside it, she'd scratched 2 letters, S and M. "Is that us?" he asked with a chuckle. She looked up, startled. I didn't mean to waste time." He ruffled her hair. "I like it." And he meant it. For the first time in years, Sam didn't count days by the bottle or the shadows on his wall. He woke up early not out of habit, but because Margaret needed breakfast. He whittled toys from scrapwood just to see her grin. He even let her teach him a clapping song she'd overheard once before Josiah had caught her and slapped her for singing. Each time she giggled now, it erased that slap a little more, but shadows didn't vanish completely. One afternoon, Margaret found a letter tucked under a rock near the front path. It wasn't signed. It simply said, "You think the dead stay dead? You stole from a devil. Devils don't forget." Sam read the letter, then burned it. He didn't tell Margaret that he recognized the handwriting. It belonged to Silas Trent, one of Josiah's men who'd slipped away the night of the fire. He didn't know where Silas was now, but he knew he'd be back. Weeks passed. The fields turned green again. Sam built a new barn. Margaret helped paint the door red, saying it was a happy color. They planted sunflowers and tomatoes and named the chickens after Bible characters. Ruth, Esther, and Mary clucked proudly around the coop. On Sundays, Clay Gibbons came to hold a quiet sermon in their kitchen. Just Sam, Margaret, and once or twice the widow from down the road who always brought peach pie. Margaret loved those Sundays. One night, as Sam tucked her into bed, she looked up and whispered, "I think God didn't forget me after all." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "He never did." She grinned and reached for his hand. "You never forget your daughter, do you?" He squeezed her fingers. "Not for a second. But peace has a habit of shattering just when you start to trust it." It began with a whistle. Low, drawn out, faint, but unmistakable. Sam sat up straight in his bed. Moonlight poured in through the open window, and for a moment everything was still. Then came the whistle again. Margaret called out from her room, voice tight. "Daddy, I hear it," Sam answered. He grabbed his rifle and crept to her doorway. "Stay here. Don't move." He slipped out the back, barefoot, rifle pressed tight to his chest. The whistle echoed again, this time from the front. He moved slow, circling the house, every step measured. The barn was dark, the coop quiet, but something was wrong, too quiet. That's when he saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trees. Silas. He held a lantern in one hand, and in the other, a rope. "I came to finish what Josiah started," he called, voice carrying in the night. You took from us. I'm taking her back." Sam didn't answer. He aimed, fired. The shot hit the lantern, shattering it. Fire bloomed across Silas's coat. He screamed, staggering backward. But another figure emerged from the trees behind him, a third from the other side. It wasn't just Silas. He'd brought others. Sam ran for the porch just as a shot rang out. Behind him. Wood splintered near his shoulder. He ducked inside and bolted the door. "Margaret, get down." The girl rushed into his arms. "They're here again?" "Yes, but I've got you." Shots pounded against the walls, one shattering the window. Sam returned fire, crouched behind the overturned table. He could hear Silas cursing, yelling to flank the house. He couldn't hold them off alone, not for long. Then, hoofbeats. Sam's heart leapt. A lantern bounced in the dark. Then another. Riders, from town. Tommy, Clay, even Sheriff Quaid, shotgun raised. Within minutes, the gunfire from the trees turned into screams of retreat. Silas ran, but not before catching a round in the leg. He collapsed at the edge of the forest, writhing. Quaid cuffed him without ceremony. "You're done," the sheriff growled. And just like that, it was over. Again. Inside, Margaret shook like a leaf. Sam wrapped her in his coat and sat with her on the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have stayed. I brought trouble." "No," he said firmly. You brought purpose. He looked her in the eye. You saved me, and I'm never letting you go. She buried her face in his shoulder. They stayed there until the sun rose, light spilling through broken glass and casting golden beams over their little cabin. A place of pain, a place of healing, a place called home. The cabin was quiet again, but not in the same way it had once been. This time, the quiet was deep, peaceful, earned. Margaret sat on the floor, surrounded by pieces of broken window glass they hadn't yet cleaned up. She traced the edge of a shard with the tip of her finger, not hard enough to cut herself, but just enough to feel the cold. Sam watched her from the kitchen as he poured coffee into his old tin mug. Outside, the morning sun crept up slowly over the fields, turning dew into sparkles on the grass. It should have been a perfect morning. It almost was. Almost. But something hung in the air, something left unsaid. He walked over and crouched beside her, picking up a piece of the glass. You scared? He asked gently. She didn't answer right. Away. Then she said, I'm tired of being scared. Good, Sam said. So am I. She looked at him. Does that mean they're really gone this time? They're gone. Even the man with the rope. Sam's jaw tensed. Silas. He won't be getting up from where the sheriff put him. She leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. Then I don't want to be afraid no more. You don't have to be, Sam whispered. Not ever again. Sheriff Quaid returned that afternoon with papers in hand. He stood on the porch, shifting the hat in his hands. I did some digging, he said. Back at the courthouse, there was a file. About her, about Josiah. Sam stiffened. Margaret stood behind him, holding his coat sleeve. Quaid gave her a small nod before turning back to Sam. She was never legally adopted. Josiah filed nothing. No paperwork, no guardianship. She's not his kin. Never was. Sam blinked. She's got no living relatives, Quaid continued. Far as the court's concerned, she's unclaimed. The word stung, but not because they were cruel, because they were true. Unclaimed. A word like that shouldn't belong to a child. So what happens to her? Sam asked, already bracing for a fight. Quaid looked down at the papers. Well, that depends. He extended them. On whether or not you sign these. Sam took the papers, his hands suddenly trembling. It was an adoption form, and at the top, in bold black letters, it read, Petition for Guardianship. Margaret Grace Harlan. He looked back at Margaret. She was staring at the form, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. You'd be her father, Quaid said softly. For real this time. Sam knelt slowly in front of her, lowering the paper to her eye level. You want that? He asked. No more pretending. No more fences. Just us. Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded hard. Yes, Daddy. Please. He signed before Quaid even finished speaking. The days that followed felt different. The town knew what had happened now. Word travelled fast after the night Silas and his men attacked, and folks began to look at Sam differently, not with suspicion, but with quiet respect. For years, they'd known him as the widower who lost himself in grief, the man who barely left his home. But now, he was the man who'd taken in a girl with nothing, protected her, and gave her back her name, and maybe in doing that, he'd saved himself too. Margaret began school, though she only attended twice a week for now. The teacher, Miss Eloise, took a liking to her immediately, and even gifted her a slateboard with her name carved into the wood. Margaret Grace, she read aloud during her first class. One of the boys in the back snickered. Ain't no Grace. About her! She's a stray! Margaret looked down, shrinking into her seat. But then Sam's voice came from the doorway. Say that again, son. The classroom went dead quiet. The boy turned white as a sheet. I was just... Sam stepped into the room, You speak that way again, and you'll answer to me. Margaret's heart bloomed. Miss Eloise gave him a knowing smile. We don't allow that kind of talk here, Mr. Whittaker. Margaret is part of this class, just like anyone else. He nodded. Thank you, just making sure. As he turned to go, Margaret caught his hand. Daddy, he turned. She stood up straight, voice steady. I want to stay, even if they're mean sometimes. He smiled, cupped her cheek, and whispered, That's my girl. That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun dipped below the hills. Margaret lay stretched out with her head in his lap, hair spread across his knee, a book open on her chest. Sam read aloud from it, though she'd already heard the story a dozen times. And the little bird, though small and frightened, flew straight into the storm, not away from it, but through it. He paused. That's a silly bird, she mumbled sleepily. No, he said. That's a brave bird. She looked up at him. Like me? He looked down at her, brushing her hair from her face. No, darling, you're braver, she smiled, and closed her eyes. But not everything healed on its own. One night, weeks later, Sam woke to the sound of muffled crying. He followed it to Margaret's room. She was curled up, clutching the quilt he'd stitched for her, trembling. Nightmare, he whispered. She nodded, unable to speak. He sat down on the edge of her bed and stroked her hair. Was it about him? Yes, she gasped. He was standing in the doorway, and you weren't here. He said you left me. He said nobody ever stays. I'm here, Sam said. But you could leave too. What if you get tired of me? Margaret, he said, voice firm but full of love. Look at me. She did, eyes wet. I don't know who lied to you, but I'll never be tired of you. I don't care if you cry or shout or get sad or scared. I'm not going anywhere. She stared at him for a long time. You promise? With everything I've got? She sat up and threw her arms around him, holding tight, like the nightmare still hovered in the corner of the room. And for the first time, he said the words neither of them had dared speak aloud. I love you, Margaret Grace, you're mine. She cried harder, but this time the tears were different. Lighter, healing. I love you too, Daddy. One morning, about a month later, Sam received a letter in the mail. It was sealed with a strange wax crest. He broke it open and read, then read it again, then sat down, stunned. Margaret came in, wiping her hands on her apron. What's wrong? He looked up. It's from Josiah's older brother. Margaret froze. He's a lawyer in Chicago. Apparently Josiah owned land, lots of it, and before he died, he signed a strange will, left it to his youngest ward. Margaret stared. That's me? Sam nodded. It means it's yours, all of it. But I don't want anything from him. You don't have to keep it, but maybe, just maybe, that land can become something good. Margaret looked at the letter, then at him. Can we build something with it? What? Do you mean a home? Not for us, we already have one, but for others, like me. Kids who ain't got a place to go. Sam blinked. You want to start an orphanage? No, she said firmly. A home. Orphanages are cold. I want to build a real home, like this one. He stared at her, overwhelmed by pride. Then that's what we'll do. That spring, construction began on the edge of the inherited land just past the Whittaker homestead. With the help of the town, Tommy, Clay, Miss Eloise, and even Sheriff Quaid, they laid the foundation for what would become the Grace Haven home. Named not after a saint, but a little girl who changed everything. The first children arrived, late that summer, 3 of them. All quiet, all scared. Margaret greeted them at the gate with a tray of fresh bread and a big smile. Hi, she said. I used to be scared too. But this place makes it better. They looked at her, unsure. But Sam stepped out behind her, tall and kind. And no matter what anyone told you before, he said, you're safe now. Margaret reached down, took a little girl's hand, and led them inside. Sam watched her go, eyes full. He remembered the first time he saw her, frail and trembling behind a fence. "Sir," she'd whispered, "could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" Now she didn't have to pretend anymore. The smell of sawdust still clung to the air, birds chirped overhead, and fresh white paint shimmered on the new walls of the Gracehaven home. A carved wooden sign hung from 2 iron posts by the gate, letters scorched into its surface with care. Gracehaven, a place for second chances, children's. Laughter echoed faintly from within. Some were already playing with sticks and hoops on the front lawn, while others clung to Margaret's sides as she guided them through the front garden beds. There were 5 children now, ranging from age 3 to 9, each with their own bruises, losses, and longings, and all of them looking at her like she was the first safe place they'd ever seen. Inside the big house, Sam was sitting at the long dining table with blueprints scattered in front of him, a pencil tucked behind his ear, flour still on his hands from baking bread with one of the boys, Joey, the quiet one who hadn't spoken a word in 2 weeks. But this morning he pointed at the rising loaf and whispered, "Is it supposed to look like a dog?" It did, and Sam had laughed. That had been the first time Joey smiled. Now, Margaret's voice carried in from outside. "Don't pull the flowers up by the roots. You got to keep the roots in so they grow again." One of the younger girls mumbled an apology. Margaret crouched beside her and said gently, "Hey, I used to pull them all up too. But now I know better." "We can always learn better." Sam leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "Thank you," he said aloud, "for this." He didn't need to explain who he was talking to. He just did it. And for the first time in years, the weight in his chest didn't feel like a stone. It felt like breath. Later that afternoon, Margaret came bounding into the kitchen, cheeks flushed, hair full of leaves. "There's a lady at the gate," she said, panting. "She's got 2 babies. Says she walked 10 miles. Sam grabbed his coat and followed her out the door. At the gate stood a woman no older than 30, cradling 2 tiny infants, wrapped in threadbare cloth. Her eyes were wild, darting left and right as though she expected someone to chase her. She tried, but then stopped. She didn't even know what to ask. Sam lifted a hand. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you here." She burst into tears right there on the gravel road, clutching both babies so tightly it looked like she'd fold into herself if she let go. Margaret took the woman's hand. "We got warm bread," she said. "And a rocking chair." The woman blinked at her. "And if you want," Margaret added, "you can stay." That night, after the babies were fed and tucked in, after the woman, her name was Liza, fell asleep. For the first time in what she said had been 6 straight days, Sam stood on the porch watching the stars. Margaret came up beside him. She didn't say anything for a while, just leaned her head against his side. "I don't think I'll ever get used to it," she whispered. "Used to what?" "How scared people look when they first get here. Like I used to be." He put an arm around her. "You don't have to get used to it," he said. "You just have to love them through it." The next morning, Sam walked into the kitchen and saw something taped to the wall. It was a drawing, coloured with crayon and a lot of heart. On one side was a little house with smoke curling from the chimney, and in front of it, a row of stick figures, all holding hands, some tall, some small. All smiling, and above them, in big letters, Gracehaven, family. Beneath that, in smaller print, it read, "We're not pretending anymore." Years passed and the house grew. New wings were added. A well was dug. A schoolhouse was built beside it, so children wouldn't have to walk miles to learn. A woman named Mrs. Haskins came to teach full-time, and her husband built shelves for the library Margaret dreamed up one spring afternoon. The shelves filled with books, and the attic filled with blankets, toys, and letters from former residents who had grown up and left, but never forgot where they came from. Some of them returned, now adults, helping the next generation. And Margaret, she grew too. From a girl hiding behind fences to a young woman leading construction meetings, baking bread with new arrivals, and keeping careful notes in the ledger of every child who entered the gates, making sure they were remembered. Every name, every story. One day, when she was 17, she stood beside Sam as he planted a new tree at the edge of the field. "Someday," she said, "when we're both old, I want to sit under this tree and remember everything." He smiled. "You'll be the one telling the stories, and you'll be sitting beside me." He didn't answer, just patted the soil down around the roots. She sat beside him on the grass, looking out at the home they'd built together. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved me first," he replied. And then one day, Sam grew too tired to work. Not sick, just older. He stayed inside more, mostly by the fire, wrapped in his favorite worn coat. Children still crowded around him, listening to stories he'd told 1,000 times. No one ever asked him to stop. When Margaret turned 21, she found a box hidden beneath the floorboard in his room. Inside were letters, dozens, all written by Sam, some addressed to her, some to his late wife, some to God. The top one read, "To Margaret, in case I'm not there to say it." She sat on the floor and opened it, hands shaking. It read, "You asked me once to pretend. I didn't pretend for long. You made me feel alive again, like I still had purpose, like my heart still had room to grow. I never thought I'd love again, not after what I lost, but I did. Because you asked. Thank you for calling me Daddy. You made that word mean something again, and if someday you read this, and I'm not sitting in that rocking chair anymore, don't be sad. I'll still be here, in the walls we built, in every child you love, in every moment you reach across fear to give someone hope. I'll be proud of you forever. Daddy." She didn't cry right away. She just sat with the letter in her lap, the sun filtering through, the curtains touching her shoulders like a blessing. Sam passed in his sleep 2 weeks later. No pain, no struggle, just peace. The whole town came to the funeral. The church was full of children, some now grown, some still holding dolls and toy wagons. They came from all over, each with their own stories, each with his name stitched somewhere in the fabric of their memories. Margaret stood at the pulpit, holding the letter. "I asked him to pretend," she said, "but he never did. He chose me. And because of him, I learned how to choose others too." They buried him beneath the tree they planted together. A brass plaque was placed at the base. Sam Whittaker, father to many, chosen by love. Years later, long after Grace Haven had grown into a proper campus of cottages, schools and greenhouses, a little girl stood at the front gate, clutching the bars. She looked scared, small. Margaret, now in her 30s, stepped out from the porch and walked slowly to meet her. The girl didn't run, didn't speak. Margaret crouched in front of her, recognizing that look, the mix of fear and fragile hope. "What's your name?" she asked. The girl looked down. "Tilly." "Hi, Tilly," Margaret said, reaching out a hand. "I'm Margaret. Do you need a place to stay?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Only if I can pretend. You're my mama." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't have to pretend," she whispered. "You already are." She took Tilly's hand and led her through the gate. Behind them, wind rustled the leaves of Sam's tree, and the sign above their heads creaked softly. A home, a haven, a promise kept. And so the story began again, with a child, a whisper, and a heart big enough to answer, not with pretending, but with love.